Monday morning emergency Fenway Rundown. I'm Chris Cotillo, Sean McAdam here, and we got to talk about Brian Bayo's cutter usage, Sean, yesterday because that was a
Why
very
we're
heavy
here.
attack against the Yankees. Obviously, kind of basically abandoned the sweeper and seven strong, and another ho hum day at Fenway.
No,
Rafael Devers, go ahead.
that was definitely the talking point
Yeah.
of the weekend. That's what people were gabbing about last night as they look back on the previous 24 hours.
Well, they were for a minute, and then everything changed. Rafael Devers is a member of the San Francisco Giants. Red Sox making a mid-June blockbuster. I think that would be understating it. They get four players back. The Giants take on his whole contract. Craig Breslow and Sam Kennedy will talk about it today. The Red Sox play in Seattle today. Devers debuts in San Francisco tomorrow, and the Red Sox face Rafael Devers on Friday through Sunday through in San Francisco. All that stuff I just said would have been completely shocking 24 hours ago. Um, Someone yesterday asked me, "Are you surprised?" And my answer was, "Today, stunned. If you really think about how the last few months have transpired, less stunned. But to put it in perspective, I was eating at Yard House, ordered a meal, and didn't eat the meal and closed out. And
Whoa, that was a big deal.
for those who know me or have seen me, that is, I think, a total shock and awe moment. I called you right then, and I think you just didn't even think it was in the realm of possibility of being real. Ruined a little bit of the end of your Father's Day, and then we got writing, but I know your shock was as great as mine.
Yeah, particularly, not that you operate on a day-to-day basis or react too much to a three-game series, but the Red Sox were riding what was kind of a season high, feel-good optimism momentum after sweeping the Yankees at home in three fairly low-scoring, well-pitched games. Um, it kind of lifted the franchise up. They were a half game out of the wild card. They had beaten the Yankees five times in six tries over the last two weekends. They had won three series in a row against division opponents, and they had a little momentum in their sails as they got ready to fly to the West Coast. And then they found out that Rafael Devers was not going to be flying with them. And yeah, this is up there with all the blockbusters of the last 30 years, whether you want to talk about Manny Ramirez at the deadline or Nomar at the deadline in '04. This certainly ranks up there with those. I think the Nomar one still is the standard bearer for shock and awe. Um,
Well,
but
I mean, I didn't cover it. I was eight, but this is mid-June. I think that adds a different wrinkle, though.
yeah, it does. We've been telling people, and it is true in large part, that it is difficult to pull off a deal of any magnitude before you get into July. Teams are still assessing where they are, trying to figure out what they need with one eye on the draft. But when you make a player like Rafael Devers available, as the Red Sox did, then teams are ready to move up their calendar and their timetable, and the Giants did. So, yeah, this one's very high on the Richter scale in terms of the disturbance it created for Red Sox and their fans.
Yeah, and look, we will get into all the impacts, all the effects, all the backstory, and everything. I think the story here, the number one story here, is that the Red Sox were ready to move on. I think Devers, in a lot of ways, was ready too. But to me, it's not about the return. It's not about the prospects or the pitchers or the money or the timing. This is a divorce. That's the headline. And how we got here, something we've both written about and covered the last couple days. We'll get into in a second. Um, it's not a move that makes you better to win in 2025. It might not be a move that makes you better. It is, in the eyes of the Red Sox, and we can argue if this is right or not, addition by subtraction from a cultural off the field standpoint. And the fact it got to this point, I think shame on them for that because they had their opportunities to make sure it didn't. And it happened fast. When we got to spring training, we had talked on the pod about, well, maybe Devers won't be thrilled about the idea of moving off third if they ask him. But to think we'd sit here on June 16th and talk about how they're going to attack and face him this weekend in San Francisco is bananas. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. No one could have expected it. But again, it happened fast. The discord was real. And I think, the stuff that we heard yesterday kind of confirmed the whispers that we've heard over the last couple months. There was a lot of people, I think, in the organization, player wise sometimes, and also just the fan base that had the whistling past the graveyard attitude on this one because he's going out and mashing. And as I tweeted last night, credit to him for having like an 1,000 OPS since the John Henry meeting. I think he was taking his frustrations out on pitchers and baseballs and all that. So the performance wasn't lacking, and on the field, he wasn't the reason for the struggles. We can say that with pretty high confidence. At the end of the day, though, this was a cloud that lingered, and we've been writing that and talking about that since, that first day of spring training. There's been ups and downs and moments where he's been, on board, and there's moments where things have been better. But at the end of the day, he felt like he was sold a bill of goods, and he was upset about the communication, which he thought was disorganized. The Red Sox looked at him and said, "You're not on the same page with us, and you are not doing the things that we expected you to do when we gave you that big contract. You're not being a team player." That's what they were looking at. Again, I think it's nuanced. I think both sides are at fault. And at the end, it became, as we reported last night, an unsalvageable, untenable situation. And I think there's fault to go around that it got to this point.
Yeah,
Period. Point
plenty.
blank.
Plenty. Start with how they handled things in the off season, where Devers came to them reportedly a few times and said, "Hey, I keep seeing the stuff about Arenado and Bregman. What's going on? Am I going to be moved? Am I coming off my position?" And they assured him, "No, nothing to this. Media speculation. We'll keep you up to date." And then within days of pitchers and catchers starting to report, Alex Bregman is signed to a 3-year deal. Devers feels a little blindsided, a lot blindsided. He takes a very dug in stance against the team when he meets with us, says he's not going to move from third, saying they lied to him when they signed him to the extension and said he was going to be the third baseman for the rest of his time here. Who knows exactly what was promised to him 2.5 years ago, but he felt betrayed. That's not too strong a word. He felt betrayed. Eventually, after the brutal 0-19 start with 15 strikeouts, he figured things out at the plate, as most people thought he would. And to his credit, was not did not have a great deal of difficulty after the first 5 or 6 games of handling the routine and the demands of the DH role. We were told by uh, no less than David Ortiz that it's not for everyone. Some guys don't ever learn how to adjust to, not playing the field and sitting on the bench between at bats and ruminating about the last plate appearance. He figured it out. But, if we're looking for two benchmarks to this whole thing, one obviously was the day in spring training when Bregman is signed and they talked to him about that. He kind of goes off on them then publicly, and we can assume behind closed doors too. And the other was early May when John Henry felt it necessary to go to Kansas City the day after Devers went public about being approached by Craig Breslow about taking some ground balls at first base. When that didn't yield any change of attitude or anything different from what Devers was showing, I think it became a ticking time bomb. It took a little more than a month to happen, but I think they kind of made up their minds. Okay, this is not going to work long term. I don't think they started making calls right then and there, but I think in their heart they knew that that was the beginning of the end. And 5 weeks later, it was.
Yeah, and obviously, I think the after effects of the meeting, and I was the one there for us, like Breslow talked about the meeting without having been in the room. John Henry obviously didn't talk about it. Devers declined to talk about it. Cora was cagey. He said it was productive and candid. I think candid probably was Rafael Devers telling them, no, I'm not playing first. I'm not picking up a glove. You guys lied to me. And, sticking to what he had told, reporters at Fenway 2 days earlier. the Red Sox were not going to kind of put that out there and say, "Hey, look, he told us to screw." Like this is even worse because it makes them look like A, they're not in control, and B, bashing a player. But the writing, I think, has been on the wall for a month with that. He is not taking ground balls other than the shortstop agility stuff, which is, not even really worth discussing. And also, kind of the stuff we've heard behind the scenes. He's not playing the field this year. He's not going to do it. He's not. And, Cora finally saying over the weekend he's our DH. Of course, it only lasted for a couple more days. But I think, you know, the fact we've harped now for weeks, and we harped at the time on Henry flying to Kansas City, the Kansas City summit, the come to Jesus meeting, all that stuff, as like the act of that is a big deal. Well, what was said in that meeting, I think, is, even now the bigger story. We don't know what it was. I'm sure there's going to be some stuff that gets out about it from whatever side, but I think it's clear now that he basically said, no, I'm not doing this, and outlined his reasons. I don't know what you guys have for me. You guys lied, whatever. And I do think that the Red Sox, and this might be a case of not knowing your own star player well enough, which I think is a big part of it. Like I think that the they underestimated
His
how bad
result.
this would get quickly. I think they had
I
this
think they
attitude,
underestimated his
right?
results.
And well, no, I think they underestimated how he'd react to it at the beginning, and that's on everybody. That's on Cora, who's managed this guy for 7 or 8 years. That's on Breslow, who let's tout from the time the sun comes up on the day of the press conference. He's introduced. Well, he's a former player, so this type of stuff's going to be natural. That's on Sam Kennedy, who and John Henry, who signed off on that big deal. I think they came into it with the attitude, well, what's he going to do? Retire? Walk away? Man, okay. Nope, he's an employee. And you know what? 9 times out of 10, that's probably going to be the reaction. This guy dug in. And, that's, they kind of, they were playing from behind in this battle the entire time. And it turns out, Devers did have the leverage. He did not, as we reported yesterday, demand a trade. I think there are some semantics the more I think about that report. We can confirm he did not demand, like he didn't go in and say, you have to trade me. There's been some reports that say he was open to it. He asked for it. I think over time in conversations, I think he expressed that he wouldn't mind a move. And it's not like he's sitting in the corner in the fetal position crying today. I think he's happy to be out of there. Is the grass always greener? He's about to find out over the course of 8.5 years.
Yeah, well, I was told last night that he received the news of the trade and responded, quote, professionally, unquote. So there was no outrage over the deal. Whether he's happy to leave remains to be seen. The ironic thing, of course, is that he's going to a team with a gold glove third baseman.
Right.
So if he is approaching this as oh, good, I get my position back, he's about to be disappointed again because Matt Chapman occupies third base for the Giants and will for the next several years, having signed an extension over last winter. So uh, that's not going to work. It'll be interesting to see if the Giants ask him to take some balls and grounders at first base for them, whether his attitude will be any different or whether it's their intent to have him DH full time.
Let me just say on that, I think that again, this whole thing's not about him not wanting to play first base. It's not about him, like refusing to do that as an outcome for the sake of it, right? It's because he felt like they went back on their word. The Red Sox told him he wasn't a good enough fielder and then asked him to learn a position mid-season. That's what it was about. With a clean slate, if they say, "Hey, we want you to play first," I could see him doing it. It's not a reluctance to play that position or
No,
learn a
no,
position.
I was just throwing it out
Yeah,
there.
no, I'm just clarifying that for the larger audience, not you.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what their plans are for him and how he reacts to what they have in mind. And it may well be that he ends up at first base for them. He will not be the starting third baseman. Doesn't mean he'll never play there. But as I said, they have a superior Gold Glove winning third baseman in Matt Chapman that they just extended for significant money. and he'll handle that position for the most part. But where does Devers play? I think this is about trust and relationship and how he feels about his employer. And my guess is he's going to be a lot more amenable to do what the Giants ask of him than he has the Red Sox over the last couple of months.
Right. And it's a clean slate, and he'll have those meetings when he flies out there today and figure it out, and then start taking aim at McCovey Cove tomorrow against Cleveland, and then Friday through Sunday against the Boston Red Sox. I mean, I don't know. We don't have a betting sponsor. We don't bet baseball. He must be like minus 500 to hit a homer off the Red Sox this weekend, right? That would be probably one of the safest bets of all time. Again, I think the story here is a messy divorce, but there is a trade made, so therefore we do have to get into the other side of it. Um, People, I think, look at the four players that came back and they're underwhelming. I think that was kind of the industry consensus too. Jordan Hicks is a not a salary dump, but a little bit of an offset. An $11 million a year guy for the next 2.5 years. He is somebody that the Red Sox really wanted to sign when he was a free agent a couple years ago. The Giants ended up signing him, made him into a starter. He's been up and down. He's hurt right now. A veteran arm. He obviously, the Red Sox love velocity. That's clear. This guy's thrown like 104, 105 in his past, and so he's a get him in the lab guy. See what you want. See what they have. A player they've liked now for a while. Kyle Harrison to me is the prize. A 23-year-old left-handed starter. The major league stats don't jump out, but again, a guy who's been a very good prospect. Tibbs, the Red Sox, of course, traded their last two first-round picks in the Crochet deal. He comes in this deal, goes to Double A. He was the 13th overall pick last year, and then Jose, not Brian Bayo, is fourth. But I think the story there is, they took on the whole deal, and that is a huge, huge, huge piece of this. We've seen this, unfortunately, for Red Sox fans a lot in the last few years with the return is somewhat offset by the money that they're getting back or the money that a team's taking on. So the best example of that was, obviously, if you take on David Price, then maybe you get a lesser prospect in the Mookie trade. If you take on all of Chris Sale's money or X amount of Chris Sale's money, then sliding scale with, what Grissom's value at the time was. Not that that was any good. And here, it could have been four unbelievable players, and the Red Sox take back more money. But getting rid of that 250 million was a huge part of everything for the Red Sox. I don't think they went into this process thinking anybody would take it fully on. Um, it's not a salary dump in the pure sense. That was not the main motivation here. It was clearing the deck and ending the relationship with Devers, of course. But they did dump a lot of salary, and I think that is the main piece that should be focused on, whether you like Harrison, whether you like Tibbs, whether Hicks has any value whatsoever. Do the Red Sox think they get some good players? Yes. From what we've heard, I think they might be overvaluing them a little bit in the internal communications based on how they've talked about them privately. But make no mistake, this was about, again, number one, getting rid of Devers, and number two, doing so in a way where he completely comes off the books.
Yeah. And, as we reported late last night, there were other teams expressing interest among the teams that called, although this is not to suggest that the Red Sox were going back and forth with a number of clubs over the last 48 hours. But at some point in recent weeks, they had been approached by the Atlanta Braves, the Toronto Blue Jays, and the San Diego Padres.
AJ Preller cannot help himself.
Right. All of whom, right, but like Manny Machado's their third baseman. They've got Arise at first. It really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but
No.
he's going to figure that out later.
Yeah.
Um, those were teams, I think, calling not because the Red Sox were necessarily advertising that Devers would be available, but teams assuming that they would listen. And again, I don't want to suggest that this was a leverage swap meet over the last few days where they're going back and forth between these four teams. Okay, we have this much. Can you beat this? We have this offer. Do you have more than that you can give us? It seemed like San Francisco showed that they were the most motivated, and part of that may have been their willingness to take on the entire financial load here. We don't know what the other teams were willing to do. That's a lot of money in the middle of a season, too. This is not the off season where you can plan your budgets. And if you sign a big free agent, you've got some time to figure out the roster and the payroll. You're adding all of this money in the middle of the year, and there's obviously another 8 years commitment after this or 7 years commitment after this.
Hmm.
So it's a significant bite of the apple financially. And ultimately, I think the feeling was, A, we need to move on from this guy because it's not anything that can continue to be a good situation for everyone involved. Um, we need to get something in return for him, and they got a couple of pitchers who could help this season, and they got full salary relief in the Giants, willing to take everything that was left. Could they have gotten more from a Toronto or an Atlanta or San Diego? I mean, San Diego is at a point now where they really can't add a lot of money. So you would think that that was a non-starter for them to take all of it.
And I mean, Toronto
Um,
just gave out like a lot of money to Vlad too. So
right. But Toronto's got a lot of money too, given their ownership. So
mhm.
maybe they were willing to go all in here. They still have Bichette, who is unsigned and headed to free agency at the end of this year. They've got to think about that. But obviously, having Devers and and Vlad as the corner infielders and the 3 4 hitters or 2 3 hitters in their lineup appeal to them. Atlanta has a very good third baseman in Austin Riley, so presumably it wasn't to do that. They've got Marcelo Ozuna to be their DH. They've got a first baseman who isn't going to be moved, so that was kind of an odd fit, but who knows? But ultimately, they went with the team that gave them some pitching for this season, a couple of prospects, and the freedom to reallocate Devers' money.
Yep, and that's where the story to me is going to be told, how they do that. People look at it and they say, if A, then B, well, they'll just pay Alex Bregman. Alex Bregman's a Scott Boras guy. If he comes back in a couple weeks and he ends up playing really, really well and continuing the way he was going early in the season, he's going to get more. He's going to opt out, and there's going to be other teams interested. Maybe the Red Sox win that bidding war. He obviously wanted to be here last offseason. He might want to be here again, though, at this point, who knows? So that's not like, a guarantee, definitely. There are other places you can spend that money, but they need to, fill that void in their lineup. There is now obviously one for the rest of the season. The other thing I'd say, right now, when you're without, at least for the next few days, Abreu, obviously you're without Costas for the year. Bregman's out. You don't have Devers anymore. A lineup that hasn't been very good, and honestly didn't do much over this weekend. The pitching was great. The offense was not. The offense is going to be a
Well,
tough
I
sell in
mean,
the next few days.
to be fair, they faced
Yeah,
Rodon and Max Fried, so you
right.
wouldn't expect them to be putting up 7 or 8 runs anyway. But you're right; these were close, low-scoring games.
And you for the rest of 2025 have a big piece of the lineup missing. What that does, and we could talk about, oh well, Yoshida slides in. Obviously, Yoshida, this creates the spot. It solves the question there. It doesn't match the production. The other takeaway with that is, they're all in on Anthony and Meyer now. And you could throw Campbell into that mix if you want, but this is a little bit of a clearing the deck for them as you're the long-term faces of this team. You're the guys. We don't know how long Bregman's going to be there. Anthony and Meyer are going to be, tested now. They're not going to have the Rafi in the lineup to help them. Obviously, we've seen up and down from both of them the first couple weeks, but this is also a big, I don't know if vote of confidence is the right word because I don't think it's the main motivation, but um, a move that signifies like the importance of these guys moving forward even more than we already thought, which it was a pretty high bar earlier.
Yeah, I think they are going to be hard pressed to score runs here over the next 6 weeks until we get to the deadline, when presumably they are going to be in the market for a run producing bat. I'm not sure who that is. We'll have more of that later. We'll take a look at some of the possibilities on the trade market. But this is not a waving of the white flag for 2025. The Red Sox are committed to keep going here. It is their intent to make the postseason. I think they feel a lot better about that in the last week to 10 days than they did prior. They've made a surge forward. They're over 500. They've figured some things out,
It's all
but they
great,
are
but they might have
now
taken the air out of the balloon last night. So
right. I mean, they are now without a with Bregman out and Devers gone, they are without a legitimate middle of the order hitter. I don't mean two or three guys. They don't have anyone right now. When you already had a rookie catcher serving as your cleanup hitter for most of the time in recent weeks, now who's your number two hitter? That's in today's game, your number two hitter is your best hitter. It's Shohei, it's Mike Trout, it's Rafael Devers, and now they don't have one of those guys. And it'll be interesting to see how quickly they address that this season. Do they wait until the end of July at the deadline when most trades get made in the middle of the season? Or do they jump the line again and say, well, look, we made a move early and now we've got to replace that guy and we can't afford to wait around a month and a half to do it? That's going to be fascinating to watch because there have been nights, whether it be situational hitting and runners in scoring position and struggles with leaving guys on, that they have really struggled to score runs. Guess what? That's going to get worse in the immediate future without Rafael Devers. And it's not just what he does and what he produces and what he knocks in, but as you alluded to, it's his impact on the others. Having him in that two or three hole kept pitchers honest because you didn't want to give him anything to hit. And that benefited some hitters, many of them young, around him. That protection's now gone.
yeah, and you know what? Like if you look at it, he's gone, but where do you put this, mysterious big hitter positionally? Kind of has to be like first base, right? I mean, your
Or it's going for
outfield is
DH again and
well, your
knocking
your
Yoshida back.
outfield's already crowded. Yoshida as a DH option, plus still the logjam even before Yoshida of Abreu, Rafaela, Duran, Ref Snyder, and
Anthony.
Anthony. Like, I mean, that is exactly that problem still exists. I think one of them is probably going to be DHing a lot, but there's not a lot of room for this mystery guy. It's still a dysfunctional roster in a lot of ways. Um, the I was going to say, like I said, the payroll, how they add is going to be, the story, whether they do that immediately, whether they do that after the season. But it's always risky to just assume something's going to happen. We've seen them over the last few years be outbid. We've seen them now win a couple bidding wars and go out and get Crochet, go get Bregman. But like, you can't just pencil in, producer X. You can't pencil in somebody who's going to have the same production as Devers.
No, those guys are not a dime a dozen.
Hmm.
And even to think that there might be one available at the deadline, for the most part, as we know, the deadline has become haves and have-nots. Teams that are out of contention have fire sales, and they want prospects for guys on expiring deals or guys who are making a lot of money that they want to unload. Who is the guy on the Pittsburgh Pirates or the Athletics or the Rockies or the White Sox that could fill that need here? The answer is that guy is not there. And that's even if the Red Sox could outbid other interested teams to make that kind of deal. But real, honest to goodness run producers are as hard to find as frontline starters at the rotation. So this is not going to be an easy swap out.
Yep. Let's get to the Craig Breslow aspect of this. We, talked about on the night it happened very early in his tenure, a lot earlier than this is in Breslow's tenure, that Heim Bloom was defining his legacy by trading Mookie Betts. That ended up being true. And I think,
In a
you know,
negative way.
yes, and look, the return was bad, and it gets worse by the day as Connor Wong doesn't have an RBI this year. But I think that was ownership, that was a directive, all this stuff. This one, um, you know, I think defines Craig Breslow's legacy too, quite obviously, very early on. Um, they didn't extend Rafi under him, but he, took the job assuming that Devers was going to be, there for the next 10 years. I think everybody was under that assumption, and now he pulls the rug out. I think it's probably a little far to say that it was, well, Breslow was pissed and he took it personally and he didn't want to deal with him anymore. So that's why he moved on. I think he looked at the totality of everything and made a bold move. But, we've
And
talked,
we should add that no deal of this significance gets
right,
done without input from upper management, i.e., Sam Kennedy, and ownership. And you
right.
have to believe that they were all on the same page here. We can't have this. We can't have a guy refusing to do what we need him to do while we pay him $31 million a year.
Right.
And this was not a directive as much as it was an agreement. They were on the same page here. So this was not Breslow going to them saying, "Is it okay if I do this?" I think they all came to the conclusion that it had to be done.
It was definitely not Breslow saying, "I'm doing this, you guys figure it out," because that's not possible with the hierarchy chain. It is possible to me that after that Kansas City meeting, John Henry said, "Find a way to get rid of him, Craig." Even if Craig disagreed, that's the boss. That's a conspiracy theory a little bit, but those things happen. I mean, that's pretty much what happened with the Mookie trade, right? We got a clear salary, find a way, Heim. And that could have happened here. You know, whether it's, you look at from a Breslow perspective, whether you look at it from a Red Sox front office perspective, we have talked on this show and in writing in a lot of places about Craig Breslow being ruthless and being willing to, put his fist on the table and say, "Hey, this is what we're doing." And a guy that has, obviously the playing experience and smartest guy in the room and all the stuff you've heard for years now. Um, he's not meek and he's not afraid. I think that's pretty clear, and we've seen that play out now about 19 times in the last couple of years. But this is a legacy definer, and it is one that he's going to be completely tied to now for the rest of his tenure and beyond.
Yep. And it's funny because other than the sale deal, which obviously did not work out or hasn't worked out uh, currently and shows no signs of working out, Von Grissom does
Now,
not
maybe
have.
they need a position player today. Maybe Vaughn comes up and lights the world on fire,
Well, let's hold our breath on that one. But
or Nick Sogard.
that trade did not work out. But the funny thing is, I think in the eyes of the fans, if they're able to take a step back before this weekend, is that Breslow had a hell of a last 6 months, right? I mean, he needed a right-handed bat and he got Bregman. He needed a number one starter and he got Garrett Crochet and then extended him as he needed to do. He needed some late inning swing and miss, and he gets Aroldis Chapman, who's been better than anyone thought he was going to be. Even minor free agents, Justin Wilson has worked out, been a nice investment for a few million bucks. Everything he's done, trade and free agent wise, since the end of last season, has worked like a charm.
Well,
But
maybe not Bueller, but go ahead.
well,
That's
yeah,
fine.
I mean that remains to be seen.
Mhm.
Uh, but for the most part, he hit on most of his big moves.
Right.
And
And
now,
Narvaez being the biggest small one.
right, right. And, those count, the guys that you kind of uncover and don't give up a lot for. In some ways, those are part of your legacy too, and he deserves credit for that one. But this one is obviously reputation changing. And, there is near, I wouldn't say complete. Some fans are saying good riddance on Devers. He
No,
was a
I don't think anybody is.
Well, I'm telling you what I've seen on Twitter.
I think it's like 95-5 or
Now,
98-2.
okay, that's not the point.
Okay.
Some people are saying good. This guy didn't want to help. He wasn't being a good teammate. Let's move on for him. But the vast majority of people are unhappy this deal got made and making it worse, think they got fleeced on the deal. That there's
Yep.
nobody in those four players coming back uh, that is going to be a real impact difference maker. Maybe Kyle Harrison becomes, in a year or so, a pretty good number two or number three starter. Maybe Hicks is a good high leverage guy, maybe even closes by next year. But there is nobody to wow anybody in this deal. And They were unhappy with the notion of trading Devers, and they're even angrier at what came back.
Yep. And you know what? It's I think beyond that bigger picture, fans are sick of organizational dysfunction. And you know what? We've talked about you can blame Rafi, you can blame Alex Cora, you can blame Breslow. Blame goes around. You've written that for months. I've written it for months. We've talked about it. At the end of the day, the dysfunction is there. Ken Rosenthal keeps writing the line, there's no drama quite like Red Sox drama. And for some reason, like that's true. It's not just that, we are, have the blinders on covering the team, which we do, but it's like you look around the league and some of this stuff doesn't happen. The memes and the talk about Mookie being in LA and Xander being in San Diego and Rafi being in San Francisco now, it's like, oh, yeah, wow, there has been a lot that's happened and, the shape shifting that they do every year to go from win now all in full throttle a year later with Crochet with Bregman to now trading your best player 2 months later. It's a dysfunctional organization, and whether the communication was horrendous with Devers, which I think we think it was, whether he was a bad employee and not a team player, whatever, like you can't have this dysfunction when you're trying to win championships, which they say they are. And that mission got more difficult yesterday. And so if you're a fan, you're pissed about that, good for you. You should be.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be that hard to keep a core together, to keep your highly paid players happy and aimed at what they should be worried about and focused on the field. But every 18 months or so, there's some brush fire that they have to put out, and it ends up resulting in a mess for the team, as this so obviously is.
And so, I think in the days ahead, the storyline becomes clubhouse reaction. Does this group fold? What does a guy like Garrett Crochet think? He just signed a big deal. Figured he'd be teammates with Devers forever. They make this move. Maybe he thought, hey, we're better off without him from a clubhouse standpoint. Maybe he's pissed that the best hitter on the team is now going to be, facing them this weekend. There's no way of knowing. Guys are probably going to be cagey in Seattle. Chris Smith is out there for us. But, how it affects the group the next week, I think will be telling. And then again, the moves ahead of the deadline, whether it be at a big bat or, if they pitch that Bregman coming back is their big trade deadline addition, fans should not go to Fenway in the second half. I mean, that would be just complete bullshit.
Yeah, we'll have to see how they respond and what their reaction is. There has to be another shoe to drop here
Yeah.
between now and the end of July. We'll see what that is. But there's no arguing the point that for all the goodwill the last 10 days provided, they are a worse team today than they were 24 hours ago.
And another conspiracy theory, Cotillo conspiracies, brought to you by MassLive.com. They could have basically pulled the trigger on this deal on Friday or something. I mean, it's not like things changed that much over the course of a few days. I think they wanted him to face the Yankees, and then that was that because he always dominates them. He homered yesterday. Ho hum. They could have pulled the trigger on the deal before the game, keep him for one more. 31 homers against the Yankees, which is a pretty striking number, and one against Fried yesterday in a big spot. He talked, everything was good, and 2 hours later, I was walking through the concourse, and they were loading up his Land Rover, and he's off to San Francisco. Just an absolutely wild day at Fenway. It'll be a wild week on the West Coast. Lots of flights coming up for the MassLive team. Thanks for listening as always. Stay tuned. Much more on the Rafael Devers story coming on the site and on the pod.